Okay, so thus far in our unit in epistemology, that is, of course, the branch of philosophy that focuses on knowledge, we have come across a definition for knowledge that we have been using, and that Descartes is certainly using in his fight against the theory of skepticism. And so you reviewed that definition, and because Descartes does have a certain orientation in terms of how we come to know truths, and that orientation is a priori, that he endorses an a priori epistemological view when it comes to how we come to know beliefs that can be categorized as certain. I had you review the concept of uh, what it means to be a rationalist, because rationalism is a theory that endorses a priori knowledge or justification or truth finding or certainty building. So you reviewed that as well. I also had you, for context purposes, review Descartes' quest for certainty, the method by which he sought it. One thing to keep in mind as iterated is that while Descartes might use skepticism as a kind of tool, he's using skepticism as a kind of, let's just say he's using it to fight fire with fire. So instead of, trying to instead of just trying to ignore skepticism or show that, that it's not to be taken seriously, he instead decides to jump into the boxing ring, if you will, the epistemological boxing ring, and say, okay, skepticism, I'm not going to try to argue against you. I'm not going to ignore you. Rather, I'm going to endorse you. And I am going to defeat you by showing how, when I apply your theory to a given belief, it will be possible that one belief can actually survive your skepticism. Um, and so what you have here in front of you then is an excerpt that I copied from the reading, and it is in Descartes' own words, that I like to have us analyze together, philosophers in their own words. And this is just giving you some context for why he decided to do that, why he decided to um, even examine his beliefs. What led him to do this? He didn't just spontaneously decide to examine his beliefs and think about whether or not they could be true. There's actually a lot of scientific, social, political, cultural things happening during his time. I'm not going to go into these here at this point during this particular semester. I just want you to know that. You can always learn more about that if you want on your own. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to just look at this passage and see how it provides context for his quest for certainty in his own words. And we're also going to note how his wording reveals an epistemological concern. And doing so, you'll want to take good notes of what I call attention to, what I'll be pointing my cursor at, because I'm going to have you mark up the passage based on what I focus on with the cursor at particular points. So take really good notes. You might want to copy and paste this into a Word document so that you can mark it up as you go. You could always hand copy this, but make sure you take really good notes so that you can give me the response that I'm looking for in the text box that is below this item. So several years have passed since I first became aware that I had accepted, even from my youth, many false opinions for true. So interestingly enough, of course, you can relate to this. In your youth, people told you certain things were true or really were the case, and they later turned out to be false. So for a lot of us, that's the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus. But of course, there come to be much more deeper things. So imagine a child who grows up in a racist household, and the racist parents tell them that certain things are true of people of particular skin tones, for example. And it turns out that that is, they see that a lot of the opinions and beliefs of that racist family about other human beings of different skin pigments turned out to be false. So that's kind of a more serious kind of example versus, the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus and whatnot. So now in this first statement, right, of this sentence, we already see that there is an epistemological concern because one, we see the word false, which is the opposite of true. So, and then of opinions we can think of as a synonym for belief, because that's really what he's talking about. He's saying, hey, I've realized that I have been holding on to beliefs that are actually false, but I sincerely, strongly believe that they were true, which is interesting because we see then that just strongly, sincerely believing something is true does not mean that your belief is not actually false. And so as I go through this lecture and pointing things out to you, I want you to be thinking about back to COVID-19 and the Trump administration, or even the media. All our beliefs about COVID-19, the pandemic, what is the government really up to? Some people are asking, like some people believe that COVID-19 is not as serious as some people think it is, and that we really don't need to practice social distancing or shelter in place. So be thinking about how this might map onto your own epistemological experience, and thinking about, well, how can I decide which COVID-19 beliefs are true about the virus? How can I be sure or certain about how serious COVID-19 is? How certain can I be about what the social media tells me? What about the Trump administration tells me? How certain can I be about, whether or not this shelter in place is really necessary? And of course, there's lots of people claiming that it's not, and that the government's just trying to control us, and that they just want to take power from the people. Are you to believe those things at face value? Are they correct and in their beliefs? Do they have true beliefs and you false? How would you know? Okay, so as I said, now if we were in class, we would, so that said, giving you, a way to connect to this passage, as I said, if we were to put concept triangles over words in this second sentence here, in the first statement, which ends here, that name concepts showing that Descartes has an epistemological concern here, we would put triangles over false, opinions, and true. And since you won't be able to do that, if I do have you mark up this passage, I'm going to have you underline it, and I'll show you how to do that. So in that, consequently, what I afterwards based on such principles was highly doubtful. Okay, so this is very interesting. So you imagine you have this belief, and you've built many other beliefs based on them. Well, the initial belief, the foundational belief, if it turns out to be false, then you're going to wonder about all the beliefs that you based on that one. So think about, maybe you presuppose that your college teachers are a reliable source of knowledge, that they only give you true, justified belief. So that is a belief that you have. You believe that teachers are reliable sources of knowledge. You think that that teachers give you knowledge, that they give you justified true belief, and that they are reliable sources of knowledge. So that's like a fundamental belief. But notice, what if you came to find out that something your teacher told you was false? Wouldn't you wonder what other beliefs your teachers told you could also be false? Yes. And so two things happen. One is, because it turned out that maybe one of the beliefs the teacher told you to accept turned out to be false, you're wondering what other ones might be false, but you're also realizing that your belief that teachers give you only true, correct beliefs, knowledge, also may not be true, may not be false, may not be correct. So there's two things going on. You can come to doubt your teachers as a source of belief, right? As true, correct belief that counts as knowledge, and also all the other beliefs that stem from your belief that they give you true knowledge. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was in elementary in the late 70s and a little bit in the early 80s, I was told that Pluto's a planet. My presupposition was that my teachers are reliable sources of knowledge. But like 100% of the time, they never taught me false things. But then later, like 20 years later, the scientists were saying maybe Pluto's not a planet. So then I'm like, wow, if that's true, then my teachers gave me a false belief, but I really sincerely thought it was a true belief that Pluto was a planet. So I'm thinking, okay, if my teachers cannot be relied on 100% to give me only true knowledge, correct beliefs, then how many other beliefs might I have from my teachers that don't count as correct knowledge? So again, we can be thinking about that in terms of the social media and our presupposition that it's a reliable source of belief, about the media, the news networks, about government, the Trump administrations, even others. Okay, so but going on to thinking about, what's going on in the text itself, he says, and consequently, what I afterward based on such principles, so fundamental beliefs, epistemological presuppositions about source of belief being reliable, was highly doubtful. So if we were going to underline a word or draw a concept triangle over another one, it would certainly be doubtful, right? So remember, epistemologists are concerned with doubt and its relation to certainty. If I can doubt a belief, then that means I cannot be certain about a belief. And any belief that I am 100% certain about, then by definition, is one that I have no doubt about. And so the idea, of course, is, are there any beliefs that are beyond doubt? So this would reflect a word that shows Descartes has an epistemological concern. And from that time, I was convinced of the necessity of undertaking once in my life to rid myself of all the opinions, so there we would underline or put a triangle over opinions, I had adopted, and of commencing anew the work of building from the foundation, if I desired to establish a firm and abiding structure in the sciences. So what Descartes wanted to achieve in this text from which this comes, and I should have said this, but you got this also from the reading, is that this comes from a larger work called Meditations on First Philosophy. And this is the very first chapter of Meditation 1. There are 6 meditations, and I've worked through all 6 with students in the past. And so he does have this overall epistemological goal of saving science from the fires of skepticism. Remember what you learned about universal skepticism and what you learned about the Pyrrhonian skeptics and how they say it appears we cannot have knowledge from the senses or from reason. So Descartes is very concerned because science is casting all kinds of doubts of beliefs on traditionally held beliefs, especially beliefs from the church. There's a rise in skepticism during Descartes' time, and he wants to deal with the rising skepticism to say we can have certain knowledge and we can definitely have it in the sciences. Now, one thing I want to emphasize to you guys is that even though he wants to save science as a source of knowledge from skepticism, that does not make him an empiricist, because ultimately Descartes thinks that even though science can get us information and data and ideas about the world, what it does is it stimulates reason to think about those ideas. So ultimately, it is reason that holds the final epistemological court in deciding which ideas or beliefs construed or attained from the practice of science will count as knowledge. So again, just because he's trying to save science from the fires of skepticism does not make Descartes an empiricist. Rather, he thinks that reason is the ultimate epistemological guide and judge of what will count as knowledge insofar as the science inform us of the world. Okay. So this is an epistemological project. When he wants to save sciences, he's talking about, the beliefs that science can give us. But as this enterprise appeared to be one of great magnitude, I waited until I had attained an age of so mature as to leave me no hope that at any stage of life more advanced I should be better able to execute my design. On this account, I have delayed so long that I should henceforth consider I was doing wrong were I still to consume in deliberation any of the time that now remains for action. Today, then, since I have opportunely freed my mind from all cares, and am happily disturbed by no passions, and since I am in the secure possession of leisure and a peaceable retirement, I will at length apply myself earnestly and freely to the general overthrow of all my former opinions. Okay, so then what he decides is, because he doesn't know which of his beliefs could be actually true or false, and because now he's wondering about some sources of belief, he decides he has to get back to the original foundation and find a belief that can withstand skeptical attack. If he can find one of these beliefs, then he can claim that skepticism is false, at least to that extent, if he can find one belief. And so basically he goes on to say that he's going to attack what are taken to be the 2 great sources of knowledge: reason and, of course, the senses. So this should make you think of how the skeptic works. And so he's going to get back to the original foundations, to where he'll say, I no longer have any beliefs that can count as knowledge. And the way that he does that is he's not going to say each and every one of my beliefs is false. He's going to say that reason and the senses themselves are not reliable sources of knowledge. They don't 100% guarantee. And that's basically what he does in Meditation 1. That's his purpose. Is by the end of Meditation 1, he thinks he has established this. Okay, so now for instructions on what to do. So what you'll want to do with this passage is I'm going to have you copy it. So figure out how to copy it with your mouse and or your keypad, and then you're going to paste it. Then what I want you to do is underline the words that I told you name fundamental, powerful concepts, showing that this passage reflects attention to an epistemological concern. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. Underline only those words that in the lecture I told you name fundamental and powerful epistemological concepts. That is concepts showing a concern that is epistemological. Okay, so the other thing that I'm going to want you to do is work with, I want you to do something with this first sentence, which ends right here. So it begins with several years and then ends at highly doubtful. What I'd like for you to do is bracket and number the statements that are in there. And so right here, you would write the number 1 and then put a bracket. So you find that on your keyboard. And by the way, if you don't see all these options, you know that you just go to this arrow right here, where see the cursor where it's at, and go like this. Okay. So then you write number 1. You don't have to do superscript. The number does not need to be above. You can't get it above. So you'll put just type 1 and then bracket like that. Oh, that's a brace. Okay. And then show me where that statement ends with the closing bracket. Then find the second bracket and type in the number 2 and then do the set of brackets. So make sure you do sets of brackets. So I'm telling you that there are 2 statements to this point right here. And actually, if you look at the whole sentence, there's actually 3 statements, but we're only going to focus on the first 2 statements in the sentence. So just mark up this passage to doubtful right here. So the first sentence does have 3 statements. The third one's actually a conditional. Instead of saying if X, then Y, it says Y if X. But don't worry about that. Only focus to right here. There are 2 statements. Again, you're going to write the number, do the set of brackets for the first statements. I've already started you on that. Find where the second statement begins, type in the number 2, and then do the set of brackets. Then I would also like for you to label each of the statements. So basically, I'm having you clarify a little argument here that is in this passage. So then here, you're going to have to add a label. I'm not going to tell you what that label is, but you're going to type in P or C next to the number to tell me whether the first statement is a premise or a conclusion, and then likewise for the second statement that is within here. When you're done doing that, you will then scroll down and you will reformat the argument and employ uniform language as you would when clarifying any argument. Oh, one other thing, don't forget to do is, again, just ignore the rest of this, right? You're only working with the first 2 statements. Is within those first 2 statements, be sure to cross out any excess verbiage as you have been taught to do. Finally, I would like you to write down 3 lecture points in full sentences below the argument that you reformat here. So you'll reformat the argument here, and then you'll write 3 lecture points. Really important. Some of you lost points on the skepticism arguments when clarifying because you did really weird things. So some of you would partially mark up a passage, and then you copy and paste it, you'd partially reformat it, and then you'd mark up and cross things out in the partially reformatted thing, and then you give me a third copy paste for the final product. Don't do that. That goes totally against the instructions. That goes totally against anything that I've taught you this semester. You are the only markup, the only crossouts I should see are in the original passages, right? The only other thing that I should see below this is the final product when you're clarifying the argument. But of course here, I'm asking you to add 3 lecture points in full sentences.